Most people, $100,000 sounds like an arbitrary number. It is a round figure that appears in headlines, financial goals, and social media discussions, yet few people stop to ask why this particular amount seems to carry so much psychological weight. The answer is not that $100,000 magically transforms someone's life overnight. It does not unlock a secret financial club, nor does it guarantee security, freedom, or future wealth. What makes this threshold fascinating is that it represents a point where several financial systems begin interacting differently, creating effects that are often invisible until they are experienced. Imagine two individuals standing at different points on the same financial journey. One has saved $5,000, the other has accumulated $100,000. Neither person is necessarily wealthy, but their relationship with money is fundamentally different. The first individual still relies almost entirely on active effort to create financial progress. Every meaningful improvement requires additional work, additional income, or additional sacrifice. The second individual has reached a point where existing capital can begin contributing to future growth in a noticeable way. The money itself starts participating in the process. This distinction reveals one of the most important concepts in financial psychology. Most people think wealth is built through earning. In reality, wealth is built through the interaction between earning, saving, time, and compounding. Income creates opportunities, but assets create momentum. The moment assets become large enough to generate visible results, the entire experience of financial progress changes. Psychologists have long observed that humans struggle to appreciate exponential processes. We naturally understand linear growth because it matches our daily experiences. If you walk 1 mile every day, you can easily predict where you will be after a week. Money, however, often behaves differently. Compounding creates growth that begins slowly, almost invisibly, before gradually accelerating. During the early stages, progress can feel frustrating because the results appear disconnected from the effort involved.
Consider an example. Suppose someone saves $10,000 and earns a modest annual return. The gains produced during the first year may feel insignificant compared to the effort required to save the original amount. The growth seems small because the asset base is still small. However, as the asset base expands, the same percentage growth produces increasingly larger dollar amounts. At some point, annual gains become large enough for people to notice without searching for them. This is where the $100,000 threshold becomes psychologically important. It is often the first point at which compounding begins producing results that feel tangible. A 5% return on $1,000 creates only $50. A 5% return on $100,000 creates $5,000. The percentage is identical, but the emotional experience is completely different. One feels insignificant, the other feels meaningful. The human brain responds strongly to visible feedback. When progress becomes measurable, motivation often increases. This phenomenon appears in education, fitness, business, and investing. Small gains create limited excitement because they are difficult to observe. Larger gains create reinforcement because the results become impossible to ignore. Reaching $100,000 can therefore produce a psychological shift that extends beyond the actual financial value. Yet, the threshold matters for another reason that receives far less attention. It changes how people perceive risk and opportunity. Individuals with very limited savings frequently focus on immediate financial threats because short-term stability dominates their decision-making. A surprise expense can disrupt an entire budget. A temporary income loss can create significant stress. As savings increase, financial attention gradually expands beyond survival concerns and towards strategic concerns. Behavioral economists sometimes describe this as the difference between scarcity thinking and abundance thinking. Scarcity does not necessarily mean poverty, and abundance does not necessarily mean wealth. Instead, these terms describe how financial resources influence attention. When resources are extremely limited, people naturally develop mental energy to urgent problems. As resources grow, mental bandwidth becomes available for longer-term planning. $100,000 does not eliminate financial stress, but it often creates a buffer large enough to alter how decisions are evaluated. Opportunities can be considered over longer horizons. Temporary setbacks become easier to absorb. Financial choices become less reactive and more deliberate. The money itself has not changed human nature, but it has changed the environment in which decisions occur. There is also a mathematical reason why this threshold appears repeatedly in discussions of wealth building. Early accumulation is usually driven by contributions rather than investment returns. Imagine someone saving $1,000 per month.
During the beginning stages, nearly all account growth comes from new deposits. Investment gains play only a supporting role. Once balances become larger, however, annual growth increasingly reflects both contributions and returns. Eventually, a fascinating transition occurs. Asset growth begins contributing amounts comparable to personal savings. At that point, financial progress is no longer powered exclusively by labor. Existing assets become active participants in the process. This transition rarely happens overnight, but many people encounter its early stages around the six-figure mark.
Historically, similar patterns have appeared across generations. Whether examining merchants during the Industrial Revolution, professionals during the 20th century, or modern investors today, wealth accumulation often follows a predictable curve. The beginning is slow, the middle accelerates. The later stages become increasingly influenced by accumulated capital rather than new effort alone. The exact numbers vary across time periods and economic conditions, but the structure remains surprisingly consistent. This observation helps explain why many individuals abandon long-term financial plans prematurely. The hardest phase is often the phase before momentum becomes visible. People judge progress based on current results rather than future trajectory. When growth appears small, motivation declines. When motivation declines, consistency weakens. When consistency weakens, the compounding process never reaches the stage where its benefits become obvious. The irony is that the period that feels least rewarding is often the period that matters most. Every future dollar generated through compounding depends on assets accumulated during the earlier stages. The visible acceleration that occurs later is built upon years of relatively invisible progress. What appears sudden is usually the result of a very long process unfolding beneath the surface. Financial systems frequently reward patience in ways that human psychology struggles to appreciate. Markets fluctuate, economies expand and contract, asset prices rise and fall. Yet over long periods, the combination of consistent saving, disciplined behavior, and compound growth creates outcomes that often seem disproportionate to the actions that produce them. The explanation is not luck or financial magic, it is mathematics operating over time. Perhaps the most important lesson hidden inside the $100,000 threshold is that wealth is rarely transformed by a single event. Popular culture often celebrates dramatic breakthroughs, sudden fortunes, and overnight success stories. Real financial progress usually looks much less exciting. It emerges through repetition, consistency, and gradual accumulation. The threshold itself is not special because of the number attached to it. It is special because of what it represents. It represents the moment when many people first witness the difference between working for money and having money contribute to future growth. It represents a shift from pure accumulation toward measurable momentum. Most importantly, it demonstrates that financial systems are often governed by forces that become visible only after sufficient time has passed. In the end, $100,000 changes everything not because it makes someone rich, but because it reveals how wealth actually works. It exposes the mechanics of compounding, the psychology of progress, and the power of time operating quietly in the background. Once those forces become visible, money is no longer viewed as a collection of transactions. It becomes a system, and understanding that system may be more valuable than the number itself.